I've been having all kinds of weird issues with the internet last few days. All right. Okay. Let me do my intro. We'll get started. All righty. We are live. And welcome, everybody, to our third climate change chat for realists. We're on a roll here. I didn't think I'd get to number 3, but yeah, here we are. I'm your host, Steve Donnelly, and this week we continue our chats with individuals who take on the climate change deniers and do what they can to ensure good information about climate change gets out to the public. Now, in our first week, we chatted with Dr. Gerald Kootenai, who many of you follow Twitter probably know as the originator of the Climate Brawl hashtag. And then a couple weeks ago, we had on another very interesting guest, Dr. Gail Sinatra. She is the author of the Science Denial book. You can check out those videos and live streams on our YouTube channel. Now, this week, we've got another very special treat for you and another doctor, Dr. John Cook, founder of skepticalscience.com website. Now, if you've done any amount of Googling about climate change, you have almost assuredly come across the skepticalscience.com website. And more recently, kind of, I guess you would call it the successor, maybe. I don't know. We'll find out. Is a phone app that Dr. Cook has created called Cranky Uncle. And it's designed to help inoculate users against climate change myths and disinformation. And we'll talk about both these projects and a lot more with Dr. Cook right now. Let's switch over. Oop, I don't want that one quite yet. I'm going to go with the guest pick.
Spoiler alert.
There we go. Hello, Dr. Cook. How are you?
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming on. It's a pleasure to meet you. Been a big fan for years now, since I got into the anti-climate denier battles myself, maybe around 2013, 2014. And as we chatted briefly before, I got hooked on a guy named Tony Heller, one of the big fish in the climate denial sea. Madman that he is. He pissed me off one day. He ended up blocking me from Twitter. And I just got really angry. I'm a pretty mellow guy, but on some things I got a really short temper. He just set me off. So I set up a blog to attack this guy and debunk all of his stuff. And Skeptical Science was one of the go-to websites that I used to debunk all of his nonsense. So I'm very honored to be able to talk to you, and thank you for all that hard work putting together Skeptical Science. And we'll definitely talk about that and all the other cool stuff that you've done throughout the years. So let's start at the beginning. So when do you recall when you first heard about climate change, and what was your reaction to it when you first heard about it, and how did you kind of evolve into where you are today, where you're like one of the leading guys on the planet for fighting climate change deniers?
It's funny. I don't remember this. I don't remember it till many years later, but I was digging through my old lecture notes from university back in the early 1990s. And I found a little assignment I did for an oceanography subject. Is global warming happening? This is like early 1990s. And it was looking at ocean heat and whether heat was being buried in the deep ocean. And back then, the article or my assignment was just a undergrad assignment. Said
you were in college for oceanography, is that right?
Yes.
Gotcha.
So I guess when I did my physics degree back many gazillions of millennia ago, it was certainly something that came up in a physics degree, but not back in the early 1990s. It certainly wasn't as prominent as an issue as it is now. But really,
right.
in more recent times, I really started to get engaged with the issue around 2007, which is a time when a lot of people are very interested in the issue. I think Al Gore's film did a lot of work in just raising people's awareness of the issue. And then the IPCC won the Nobel Prize in 2007 for their fourth assessment report, I think it was. And for me, I had a interesting lunch with my father-in-law and my wife's family back
Yeah.
then, and at some point in the conversation, my father-in-law started arguing that global warming wasn't real and it wasn't caused by people.
So see the
And
inspiration for your app?
it turns out that lunch conversation was a life-changing moment
Oh,
because
really?
it got me interested in the topic, mainly because I wanted to make sure that I beat my father-in-law in a debate next time the topic came up. So it wasn't the noblest, I want to make the world a better place. I just wanted to
Right.
beat my father-in-law in an argument. But as I dug into the issue, I started to get a deeper appreciation for what the science said about climate change.
So what up until then, what were you doing? Were you doing physics or
I started
oceanography?
out doing a physics degree, but then after I graduated, I actually went into, I left academia and went into graphic design for a
Ah,
bit,
that explains it. Yeah.
doing website database programming and then cartooning for many years.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
I was
Definitely want to hear
dabbling in
about
lots
that.
of different things. And at the time that was um, I had this argument with my father-in-law, and which eventually led to me starting Skeptical Science. I was actually working full-time as a cartoonist.
Oh, no
Then,
kidding.
as Skeptical Science grew and grew, eventually it kind of sort of took over. It was like this force all of its own.
Now you
And
started Skeptical Science completely on your own. You just said, "Hey, I got some skills. I'm going to set up a database and throw up a website front end," and that's how it started.
yeah, I was um, I guess you would call an Uber nerd, not only a having a physics background, but also a database and website background. And so being interested in the topic of climate change and also anticipating potential arguments at family get-togethers, I've started building a database, just an internal database. Here is all the possible arguments that I might encounter.
Yeah, that's
And
crazy.
and then I started collecting what were the relevant scientific studies to do with each argument, kind of a summary, a scientific summary for on where the state of the science was on each specific climate myth.
That,
And eventually, that database I turned it into a public website, Skeptical Science.
let me switch over to the site here so we can take a look at it. Give me 1 second. Let's hope this works. There we go. Yeah, so there's the skepticalscience.com website. So now the word skeptical seems to have gone through an evolution in this like postmodern world where, at first when you like, I remember a guy, I forget his name, the Amazing Randy, I think his name was, and he was a skeptic of, the amazing Kreskin and these psychics and people who could bend spoons with their mind and all this stuff. And so he made a name, and he used to be a carny. He used to work at a carnival. He used to be an escape artist. And then in the last part of his life, he spent enormous amounts of time debunking these con artists, and he would go on Johnny Carson and, did a bunch of talk shows, and, he called himself a skeptic. And then at some point that got flipped, and like climate change and I started using skeptic to debunk actual science. That's just kind of jujitsu flip the name of that word. So I always wondered, what was the origination? Why did you decide to call it skeptical science? Was that in response to the climate change deniers?
Yeah, it was an attempt to jujitsu flip it back to its original meaning.
That's why I always wondered. Yeah. Well, then now I know.
Because skepticism and science, to me, they're synonymous. Skepticism is about being evidence-based. You look at the evidence first, and then you come to a conclusion. But science denial starts with the conclusion, and then they cherry pick any evidence that backs up their conclusion, and they deny any evidence that contradicts it.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
the
That's a good way
polar
of putting it.
opposite of genuine scientific skepticism.
Right. Yeah. No, it's fascinating how, language is such a big factor in all this. And, you know, you know, we
There
can
was
talk about
another
all
technical
the different terms
limitation.
like cherry picking. These are all kinds of things that I learned as I'd never heard of cherry picking before until I started reading about all this stuff. And you know, all these concepts are, you know, there's a huge amount to learn that goes into all this skeptical stuff. You know, it's quite a bit of work. So now, when did this site actually get mature? So you started in what, 2008? I think you said.
2007, and
And were you
started
working
it
like
in a
full
pretty
time on
low.
this?
Sorry?
You were working full time on this?
No. This was just something I was doing in my spare time,
Wow, that's insane.
and for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Then the real spike happened in 2009. Like, our traffic started to accelerate because of at the end of 2009, two things happened. One was ClimateGate, where
Right.
scientists' emails got hacked and climate deniers started picking through the emails and cherry picking or quote mining.
Right. Quote mining. Right.
Bits of text out of context, trying to paint this impression of a big conspiracy. So they were just trying to promote this conspiracy theory that scientists were faking data and trying to trick the public. And this happened just a few weeks before a big international climate summit at Copenhagen.
Right.
At the end of 2009. And really, ClimateGate, or stealing these scientists' emails, was about trying to undermine the science just prior to the climate negotiation. And so there was a big explosion of interest in climate change and climate misinformation. And so at that time, we saw a spike in traffic. And then it just kept growing from that point. And then the website became more and more demanding of my time, became a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so you did it with no funding? You just bootstrapped it from nothing? Is that right?
I mean, it kind of helps if you have a background in web development. It also helps if you marry a very talented graphic designer. So that's one tip I have for anyone wanting to start a website. Be a graphic designer or marry a graphic designer if you don't have the funds to do it.
You said you did cartoon work. How did you get into that? So you were a full-time cartoonist when you started this up. So you're like the anti, what's his face here? The Dilbert guy, Scott Adams. So he became a climate denier. You became a
cartoonist who also publishes climate misinformation.
Yeah.
So I'm now a scientist fighting climate misinformation using cartoons.
Yeah, that's quite amazing. And so that came in handy for the app, which we're also gonna take a look at here shortly. But you didn't do graphic design. That was all your wife who came up with the design for Skeptical Science.
I've done graphic design, but compared to her, I'm a hack.
Yeah.
So if I ever, in fact, I've done designs and then my wife will redo it, and it's night and day. so yeah, if you want it done properly, get a proper professional to do it.
Right. And did you have any scientists that you could reach out to and say, hey, I'm working on this project. Would you help me answer these questions, or you just dig it out all on your own? Now, I guess you had the science background, so you probably had the math to be able to go through and look at the actual papers and decipher what they said. Is that right? Or
before I started my PhD and I went back into the academic world, a lot of papers that I would want to read, a lot of scientific studies would be behind paywalls, and it's hard to get hold of them. But I found a really useful tactic was I would email the author of the paper and just flatter them outrageously, say your research is so interesting, and most of the time scientists are like, oh wow, someone's interested in my research, and they would immediately send me the paper. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it's a great resource. I also like how you broke down the site into basic, intermediate, and then an expert. Now, even some of the basic explanations are a little challenging at first.
That's on us then. It's the responsibility of the communicator to make the basic version accessible to anyone. So if we're not doing that, then we need to try harder. But you asked earlier, do many scientists help us? Funnily enough, it was a physicist from Sydney who emailed me saying, hey, you should do this basic, intermediate, advanced idea that
So
was originally
he came up with
proposed
it.
by Gavin Schmidt, the climate scientist from NASA, who runs the Real Climate blog.
Yep.
And I said, yeah, that's a great idea, but it sounds like a lot of work. Can you help me with that? And he's like, no,
kidding.
I don't want to do it. You do it. But I just thought you should take that suggestion on board.
So this was at Copenhagen? You went to Copenhagen then?
Did I go to Copenhagen?
I thought you said you met him in Copenhagen, no?
No. He was a physicist from Sydney, from UNSW.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But he was just suggesting this idea but not offering to help. And it was actually at that point, and I think it would have, I forget the year, probably would have been around 2010, 2011. I was trying to get people to help this website, which I was just running by myself. And people would email me saying, hey, the debunkings are great, or just would send positive emails. And then I would ask, are you interested in helping? And everyone's like, no, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
But when I got this suggestion to do these 3 levels of rebuttals, I knew it was an insane amount of work. And so I just did a blog post on Skeptical Science, a call to action saying, hey, I've written all my rebuttals at roughly an intermediate level. Does anyone think they could help me convert the existing text down to a basic rebuttal? And instantly overnight, I got dozens of people saying, yeah, I think I could do better than you. so overnight, the Skeptical Science team formed.
Oh, really? Nice.
And we created this community, and that's how we were able to produce all these rebuttals.
Yeah, I seem to remember vaguely you had teamed up with some other folks. I think one of the guys' names was Dana. Is that right?
Yeah, so Dana was one of the original people who joined us at that time. And in fact, most of the people were taking my intermediate rebuttals and converting them down to basic rebuttals. But Dana Nucitelli, who internally we call him the cyborg, because he's just so prolific and methodical.
Yeah.
He was actually writing advanced versions. So he would take my, 1,000 or 2,000 word rebuttals and create a 5,000 word super detailed version.
Gotcha. And where did you mine the material from? Where did you find the deniers to rebut? Was it mostly on Twitter that you were looking at?
No, because I don't know if it predated Twitter, but certainly Twitter was not quite the thing that it is now. And in fact, I resisted starting a Twitter account for as long as possible. But the way originally what we did was whenever we encountered new articles like misinformation blog posts, we would add them to our database and we would note what were the myths that they were arguing. And that was how we were able to create the most used climate myths, which you can see in the left margin, that ranked them based on how often we were seeing them.
Oh, very interesting.
It's not the most systematic way of tracking what are the most common myths.
Yeah.
You really need a more objective analysis to do that, which actually we just published a few weeks ago. But it was a good indication of what were the most common myths.
Gotcha. Very interesting. I never noticed that before. And this is still active, right? I mean, I was just looking at a comment. Now, who is maintaining it right now? Are you still the admin of the site, or has that been delegated out to others?
So we have this community which formed way back when I first put that call to action out.
Yeah.
But the community remains, and some people write content, some people help moderate the comments, other people help translate content into different languages. If you go right to the top, you'll see all these flags. I forget how many there are, roughly 20 different translations. So there's a whole bunch of people all contributing.
So now I'm a techie myself. What's the under the hood? Is it a content management system that you developed, or is it built on another content management system?
Well, so the answer to that question is, it was originally a content management system that I just built from scratch.
Yeah. Geez.
So it's not using WordPress or Django or any of those, off-the-shelf content management systems.
Right.
And it needed to be custom because the data is so unique and interconnected. We've got rebuttals, connecting to misinformers, connecting to fallacies, connecting to everything.
Gotcha.
So
Oh wow, you've got an app too. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, but in terms of the website, just as my graphic design is hack compared to my professional graphic designing wife, my programming kung fu is pretty awful too compared to a professional programmer. So
Yeah.
we actually have a programmer from Holland, the Netherlands, who helps maintain the site now.
Oh, nice.
And he tries to be polite. I think he calls me a hobbyist programmer, which to him is as generous as he can be about the quality of my code.
Yeah,
and he's gradually fixed it, plugged all the security holes, and we're gradually rebuilding it from the bottom up. So the shell is pretty much the same shell since 2007. Like, this is a 14-year-old design, and it's a bit old and creaking now, but it's not doing too bad given its age. And 14 years is like a millennia on the internet.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I think the only complaint I have about it is it's not mobile friendly, but now you've got the app.
No, that's a high priority, is making it mobile friendly. And
yeah,
once we've rebuilt the plumbing underneath, the next step will be redoing the skin to make it mobile friendly.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I should circle back through here. I haven't looked at it in a while. My days of fighting Tony Hiller are a little bit gone. All right, very, very cool. I've always wanted to know kind of the story of this website. And now, was this kind of like the first one out there that did something like this?
No, there was, at the time, I remember Kobe Beck had a really great resource. Maybe it was on DSmog or his own blog, but it was a blog where he did debunk misinformation, climate misinformation. Often he did it from a more argumentative way, and which was really good. But what I wanted for debunkings was the actual scientific studies.
Right.
And so that's why skeptical science is very much based on linking to the primary, like, peer-reviewed studies. And it's interesting because I started with this sort of very physics-based, like, empirical science approach, but then gradually I've been moving more and more towards an argumentative approach, like Kobe Beck's original resource.
Well, I think that was great, the way you did that, to link to the original sources, because I was a layperson. I was familiar with the scientific process, but I certainly was an expert. I had a vague idea of what peer review was, but I never really sat down and thought about, well, how do these scientists figure this shit out? I just, not something I thought about regularly. And so, just the basic understanding, these papers are the foundation of, all of this knowledge and the peer review process. And then they all get together, at least with IPCC, and kind of flesh out, what they think is the most accurate. And, so that's phenomenal that you took that kind of a foundational approach to how this knowledge was acquired. I think that's kind of a linchpin for anybody wanting to figure out whether or not this stuff is true or not, because it's very confusing. When I would Google something on climate change, 9 times out of 10, Tony Heller's shit was up there in the top 5. And he kept coming up, and, in the back of my mind, I'm going, well, I don't think he's reputable, but, he's got, a lot of hits on Google, so he must be popular. So, there must be something to what he's saying. And, it took a while for me to really flesh out what was true and what wasn't. And, it's very difficult to do that unless you spend a lot of time, figuring that out. So thank you very much for helping me understand all this complicated stuff. All right. So you did a lot of there's other projects. One thing that sticks in my mind that you did, I found fascinating. There's this other guy I'm kind of fascinated by these. I call them sociopaths. It's not a scientific term. But Morano, what was his first name? Is it
Mark
Mike
Morano.
Morano? Yeah. So you actually did an interview, and how did that come to pass? And what is his deal? Is he even still around? And what are?
Oh yeah, no, he's very much still active.
Yeah, no kidding.
So I went to COP21, which was in Paris in 2015,
Hmm.
and at that time we were um, working on MOOCs, massive open online courses, collecting a lot of video, and I was interested in having somebody articulate all the different climate myths as a potential resource that we could use in a MOOC or something.
Hmm.
And Mark Morano was the logical person to ask to do that, because there's no one who can cram as many myths into a short period of time as him. He talks very quick. He can articulate every climate myth under the sun, and he's kind of fun to talk to
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well.
That's
Whereas other people there are other people who would put my teeth on edge. Whereas I think Mark does some really damaging work, but he's also quite charming, which is kind of a dangerous cocktail. And so I just emailed him and said, asked if he was interested in being interviewed, and because he was going to be at COP21 as well. And so the hardest thing was just actually finding a place to actually do the interview. And we both had to end up walking from the main venue for the conference and walking about over a mile away, or maybe it was a mile and a half, before we found a room where we could actually conduct the interview.
Hmm. And have you ever done any thinking about what makes these guys tick? Well, I'm sure you have, but have you come to any conclusions? I mean, how? Uh, First of all, does Mike believe what he's saying? Do you think he believes what he's saying, or is he just hustling to make a buck? Uh, can you have can you shed any light on a guy like this?
I think it's really difficult, practically impossible, to tell the difference between the two,
Yeah,
because intentional deception is indistinguishable from self-deception.
yeah,
And you must never underestimate the human capacity to deceive ourselves.
yeah.
We have a whole range of psychological biases, like confirmation bias and relying on fake experts, and disconfirmation bias, resisting evidence that we don't like. These are universal human conditions that we all are vulnerable to.
Yeah.
But when we're motivated to deny something, then we're even more, I guess, vulnerable to biases.
Hmm.
So someone who uses denial techniques like fake experts or cherry picking might be using them as an intentional strategy because it's in their financial interest, or they're on an ideological mission. But someone might just be genuinely biased and believing it, and it looks exactly the same. Cherry picking is cherry picking, regardless of whether it's intentional or because of motivation.
But I gotta imagine a guy like Mike Morano, who's obviously a smart guy. He knows about confirmation bias. uh, I gotta imagine he's thought to himself, maybe I'm the one who's wrong. Maybe I have the confirmation bias. And if I am wrong, well, I'm screwing over the planet. So I really, shouldn't be doing this, I don't
I think
know.
there are a few people who know exactly what they're doing, and they're
Yeah,
very cynically manipulating the data to mislead people. But most people need to sleep at night. And I
right.
think that ideology is really powerful. It can give us a sense of mission,
Yeah.
and they might even be willing to twist the data for their ideological goals. So yeah, again, I think I don't. I tend to not get too wrapped up in why, because it's just impossible to see underneath. And even people, I think people are not always self-aware and even can identify themselves
Mm,
what's exactly driving them. I tend to focus more on how, what are the motives, what are the techniques that they use, because we can tell those, we can see those from the outside, and they look the same either way. So it's about
Right.
spotting those techniques and inoculating ourselves against them.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, if I, like I said, I think I mentioned to you, there's a politician in town, and he was very similar. He had these beliefs. I think he was on the spectrum, and that's not me saying that. Actually, a professional had kind of diagnosed him remotely. She was an educator. But anyway, you could not talk logically to the guy, no matter what evidence you presented, no matter what you said. Um, he thought that the city was going to go bankrupt, next year, but, the bond rating for the city is really good. And you could try to explain and explain and explain it. The mayor tried to talk to this guy. He was on the city council. And, most of the city councilors were against this guy, but you just could not get anything through to him. And I'd never seen anybody like this in my life. I was very naive, and I thought everybody, you know, was more or less like me. They were looking for truth, and they would, in good faith, flesh out the evidence. And this kind of behavior seems to have just taken off, where you got more and more irrational thinking going on. You can see it with the type of politicians that are getting elected. You can see it with all the conspiracy theories floating around. I mean, it is extremely uh, frightening, what's going on. And I guess the good news is, as far as the climate debate goes, we're kind of winning the battle. From what I've seen, at least on Twitter. Now, I'm not reading any scientific studies or anything like that, but I have seen some polls that indicate that belief in climate change is on the rise, and there's fewer and fewer deniers. Do you basically see that? Do you see kind of a dwindling of climate denial in general?
Yes, the polling data shows that climate deniers are shrinking, and people are becoming more concerned and alarmed about climate change. George Mason University and Yale University have been collecting doing these giant national surveys twice a year since it's been about 15 years or so now. And they just find this incrementally increasing trend in acceptance about climate change. And as far as misinformation goes, a few weeks ago, we constructed a 2-decade history of climate misinformation. And we find that science denial misinformation is going down, and it's climate misinformation.
You mean the actual amount of information is going down?
Yes.
Disinformation?
So if you look at the landscape of climate misinformation, some of it is about science misinformation, like it's not real, it's not us, it's not bad. And then some of it is targeting climate solutions, arguing that policies will be harmful or renewables won't work. We're seeing less and less of the science denial and more of the solutions denial. Right. And one of the conclusions of our paper is that solutions denial is the future of climate misinformation.
Yeah, I think that's been kind of the thought for a number of years now. It's that latter, what is it, climate science isn't real, or it's real, but it's not harmful. Oh, it's harmful, but there's nothing we can do about it, and so on and so forth. And now I do worry about that, because isn't it a lot harder? You can't scientifically prove solutions as easily as you can the science. So do you think this next wave of misinformation about solutions is going to be much harder to take on?
Yes, it is. It is more complicated,
Yeah.
And science denial is kind of the low-hanging fruit. A lot of it is just directly against empirical data. With solutions denial, some of it's values-based, which is really tricky, and a lot of it is about specific policies. So then you're getting into the weeds about policies, and often policy is about predicting what's going to happen in the future if you do this or that policy. And it's actually more complicated and difficult than climate predictions, which again is not easy either, but climate predictions are at least physics-based. Once you get into economics, it's even trickier.
Yeah. Well, that's a little scary. I mean, I worry about the day when there are legitimate policies on the table, and one of the major political parties in the United States says, "Oh, that's socialist," and they rile everybody up, and with just total nonsense. I have no idea how you beat that back. I don't know. Um, so I guess we'll find out. Hopefully
And
soon.
that is a growing aspect of climate misinformation is culture war
Right.
talking points, trying to just polarize and make it more tribal.
Right.
It's really dangerous because humans are social animals.
Right.
And so
Exactly. Yeah.
polarizing arguments that try to divide us up into tribes uh, resonate. They can be quite powerful. And then once you get that degree of polarization, it's really hard to build a social consensus again.
Right. Is there any scientific approach or theories about how to address that specific problem, the problem of polarization? I mean, I guess specifically, I mean, obviously no one has an answer to that, but I mean specifically in the context of climate change.
So I don't know if you've seen the movie Dunkirk, the World
No,
War II movie.
but I've heard about it.
Well,
Yeah.
there's a scene where they're in this boat
Yeah.
and they're being shot at, and every bullet hole, this water starts coming in, and then they're trying to plug the hole. They're just trying to cover up the holes with their hands, but then more bullets coming in, shooting more holes.
Yeah.
That's a good analogy for polarization and misinformation,
Yeah.
because misinformation is what's causing the polarization. And so when people say, how do we solve polarization? When there are solutions that don't deal with the problem of misinformation, it's like trying to plug up those holes
Right.
without dealing with the thing that's causing the holes in the first place. So we need to tackle misinformation and neutralize its polarizing influence.
Gotcha. Well, maybe you could do Cranky Uncle 2 and focus on climate solutions. So let's take a look at Cranky Uncle. I'll flip over to the app here. Let's see. All right, can you see that?
Yeah.
All right, so let's give this some setup. So you did the climate or skepticalscience.com website. Now I think of this as I haven't looked at it yet, so I don't know. I'm asking. Um, this is kind of like the gamification of skepticalscience.com, and maybe not quite as science heavy, but um, more to help you just understand what the common attacks on climate science are, and how to overcome those the misinformation with facts. Is that generally right?
Yeah, I think you've touched on it. There's two main ways to counter misinformation: fact-based corrections and logic-based corrections.
Oh, I haven't heard that.
Fact-based corrections show how a myth is wrong by explaining the facts.
Hmm.
So there's a myth about the greenhouse effect. So you explain to people how the greenhouse effect works.
Mm-hmm.
And once they understand that, then they can see how the myth is wrong. Logic-based corrections explain the fallacy or the rhetorical technique used in the misinformation. So you say, well, that myth uses cherry picking, or it's a false dichotomy,
I
or
got you.
it's a red herring. So you're more about the argumentation approach. So which I talked about earlier. Like as someone with a physics background, I was attracted towards a fact-based approach, citing empirical studies,
Mm-hmm.
but then gradually moved more towards a logic-based approach because my psychological research was nudging me towards this as a more effective way to tackle misinformation. And Cranky Uncle is a purely logic-based approach, or almost purely. It really is about explaining the different techniques used to mislead people.
All right, well, let's check it out. And after this, I also do want to talk about your psychological stuff, psychological research on the climate change, and what you're doing now at the University of Monash. I'm very interested in that too. All right, so let's take a look. Should we start at the beginning? Should I go to the home?
Fake it. Well, yeah. Home's
Go to the home.
a good starting point.
All right, yeah. So this is what the app looks like when you first open it up. There's a very simple sign-in process. You just put in your email, and I'm assuming you don't sell that or do anything with it other than
Oh
just
no,
identify
absolutely
the
not.
person.
Not only because it's bad
Right.
to do that, but also this game also does scientific research, and
Oh, really?
there are very rigorous processes if you're
Mm,
ever doing any scientific research that involves people. Very rigorous about privacy and protecting any participants.
very
So
interesting.
there's a whole level of like it goes way beyond the level of rigor of a commercial app because it's scientific research.
Very
So yeah, we
interesting.
definitely would not share the emails with anyone.
I did not know that. Now, is this app your brainchild, just like Skeptical Science, or how did it come to fruition?
Well, I mentioned my talented professional graphic designer wife.
Yeah.
Um, like when we go on walks, we often talk about lots of ideas, lots of creative ideas that we have. And this was actually an idea she had. She was interested in doing app design to do with some of her creative projects. And so
Interesting.
Cranky Uncle began as just a, well, let's just practice app design with this first. And originally it was going to be just a static app with just content taken from the Cranky Uncle book, just explaining different
Oh,
fallacies.
so the book
But
came.
then once I started the process of thinking about what a Cranky Uncle app might look like, the idea of gamifying critical thinking just became more and more compelling. And
Mm.
like everything, it just got more and more complex and ambitious.
So I didn't know that the book came first. I always assumed the app did. So what? When did this book come out? I forget the name of the book. What is it?
Cranky Uncle versus climate change.
Cranky
So
Uncle
that
versus
came
Clint.
about, and we're kind of telling the story backwards now, but that was the result of my research. Like my PhD research was about the psychology of misinformation and how do we build public resilience against misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer coming out of 5 years of PhD research was inoculation. We
Mm,
inoculate people by explaining the techniques used to mislead.
mm,
My next question was after my PhD, how do you do that? What are practical ways to explain the techniques of misinformation? And I was talking to some critical thinking philosophers at the University of Queensland, and they introduced me to the idea of logic analogies. What they call it parallel argumentation.
mm,
It's really the idea of take the bad logic in a myth, transplant it into an analogous situation, like something concrete, an everyday
mm.
example of, from everyday life, and use the same flawed logic in this everyday situation, and it can make the bad logic much more obvious to people. And I realized that comedians were doing this technique all the time. They were
Huh.
debunking myths that were coming from the public figures of the day, and they would say, well, such and such said this, that's just like being in this situation, and then they use the same logic.
Yeah.
Everyone laughs, they instantly get how ridiculous the original argument is.
Gotcha.
And that's really logic-based corrections.
Gotcha. Interesting.
It's using logic analogies.
Well, as I was thinking about the app, preparing for the live stream, it struck me that this is exactly what I did as a labor organizer. I used to be a labor organizer back in the mid, like 96, 97, 98. And you had to talk to workers. And we called it exactly that. We called it inoculation, where you were basically in a campaign. The company is trying to get the workers to vote against the union, and we in the union were trying to get the workers to vote for the union. And we had to learn these techniques of how to point out why what the company was saying was bullshit. And the goal was to try to inoculate as many workers as possible before the company came out with a big anti-union campaign. So it was the exact same technique. So that's really interesting. Now, so is this app designed for people who have not yet encountered climate denier arguments, or what if if I've already heard a lot of arguments, will this app help me too? Or is there any specific target audience that you had in mind for it?
I mean, ideally beforehand is always good. It's generally better to prevent the damage from happening in the first place rather than trying to go in and undo the damage afterwards.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I think that probably how the game will have its biggest impact is in the classroom. Teachers teaching critical thinking to their students and using the game as a tool, as something interactive and fun for the students to play. But also, like what I found with my psychology research is explaining the techniques used to mislead can also help undo the damage as well. And I mentioned the polarizing influence of misinformation. This logic-based approach works across the political spectrum. It actually neutralizes misinformation, whether people are at the left end of the spectrum or at the right end.
Interesting.
So whether people are conservative or liberal, nobody likes being misled.
Now, you're doing this for research, so I've got to imagine that you've rolled this out and studied the effects of the app. Can you talk about any of those? I don't know if you call them experiments or what, but what would be the right term for something like that? Just is it an experiment?
Yeah, it's a field experiment, which is a little messier than a controlled lab experiment, but it's field research. It's pretty basic in its design. At the very start of the game, you're asked, do you want to participate in research?
Yeah.
It's completely voluntary, but if someone says yes, they're just shown 10 examples of misinformation and see if they can spot the technique used to mislead.
Gotcha. Well,
then they play the game. If they get to the very end of the game, they're asked to participate in the same quiz. And we just simply measure, did they score better
gotcha.
At the end of the game compared to at the beginning.
All right, well, let's go through it. All right, so I'm going to tap.
It takes at least 30 minutes. So
30 minutes? Okay. Well, just show me the highlights. Should I go in and take a quiz?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I mean, at the beginning, you're only shown very basic true-false questions.
Okay.
Because we have a lot of fallacies that we teach, but we don't want to ask you questions about those fallacies until you've read an explanation of it. Otherwise, you're just getting all this jargon thrown at you, and it's meaningless.
Gotcha.
But yeah, let's have a look at a true or false.
All right.
All right. Yeah,
scientists published research into climate change, or publishing research into climate change, are appropriate experts to speak about human-caused global warming. Well, I would say that was true. Right. I got 5 cranky points. Nice.
Yep. You've just got a little bit crankier. The goal of the game is to earn cranky points and become like a cranky uncle. So currently your
Wait a minute.
mood
So
is
I don't get it. So being a cranky uncle is a good thing in the game?
In the game, it's kind of a dark humor approach. It's an approach called active inoculation. So most of how we understand inoculation is passive inoculation.
Yeah.
Someone's explaining the techniques used to mislead. Probably what you did in that example you used earlier was you were explaining anti-union arguments that the company was going to use, and your audience were passively receiving it.
Mm-hmm.
That's passive inoculation. With active inoculation, you're getting people interacting or even encouraging them to actively produce misinformation in a controlled, humorous setting. But that's really a much more kind of interactive way to get people learning the techniques. And what research has found is that active inoculation is a really powerful way to inoculate people, but it's also quite entertaining. And these days, dark humor in games is pretty popular. So it's just an engaging way to package the information.
Interesting. A lot of thought goes into this, huh?
If you click on learn more denial techniques down the bottom, maybe what we should do next is actually start going through, or just at least go through one explanation. So if we click on fake experts,
all right,
this is one of the most common types of misinformation.
And by the way, you drew all of these characters, right?
Yes.
All right. So what do you do when the world's experts disagree with you? Use fake experts. Fake experts seem highly qualified, but don't have the relevant expertise. We appreciate the importance of expertise in real life. Relax. I have a bachelor in computer science. Let's see whether you can spot a fake expert. No pressure. I have very low expectations.
He's very rude. Cranky uncles usually are.
Which is an example of a fake expert. Professor Smith, who holds a PhD in computer science, says evolution is not settled science. Was he a fake expert? Well, let's see what other choices. Astrophysicist Professor Jones explains how we detected a massive black hole in the center of the Milky Way galaxy. Well, he doesn't seem fake to me. Medical researcher Dr. Clark published a scientific report into the benefits of vaccination. Well, that's his field, so I'm going to go with A, because that is not his field of study. Computer scientists wouldn't know much about evolution. So I'm going to choose him. Well, that brings up a good point, because that comes up all the time. Oh, he's a doctor. Oh, he's got a Nobel laureate. Who's that guy I'm thinking of? I think he's from
Linus
Princeton.
Pauling, probably?
No. Up in my mind. I used to know all these guys off the top of my head.
There's a handful of Nobel laureates who,
Right.
like, I forget the term for it, but it's when Nobel laureates go weird. So, and they start commenting on things out of their field. They kind of assume that because they got a Nobel Prize in one field, that makes them an expert in a different field,
Right.
like osmosis or something.
It's just bizarre, though. How can they think like that?
They're quite persuasive, because to
Right.
the general public, you just hear Nobel Prize winning scientists.
Right.
That is a very credible voice, regardless of whether the discipline is relevant to their original prize.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, if you've got a doctorate and you won a Nobel Prize, you've got a very high functioning brain. But my theory is there's also, being smart doesn't necessarily make you sane or a rational thinker, that's the only way I can explain how these guys go off on these wild kind of theories that they have. It's just bizarre. All right, so I got 10 cranky points. Expertise in computer science doesn't make one expert in evolution. Scientists who haven't published any climate science research make great fake experts on climate change. Which is a fake expert about climate change? Retired. That's the guy right there. The retired physicist from Princeton.
Well, you're thinking of, I didn't name him, but it's I'm blanking on his name at the moment, but
I want to say Freemason, but it's not Freemason.
Yeah, so it's William
he's like
Happer.
98 years.
He hasn't won a Nobel Prize, but he used to work at was it Harvard or no, Princeton? I think he was a Princeton physicist. So you just hear Princeton scholar, and people are like, oh wow,
right?
Ivy League University. That sounds fancy,
right.
But he hasn't published any climate research.
All right, now my last choice here is Frank Next Door. Now I'm just going to pick Frank Next Door. Let's see what happens. Good. His name is Carlos, but I don't know any Frank Next Door. Incorrect. Frank's great and all, but he's not a very convincing expert. Well, I'll tell him that. All right, try again. Which is a fake expert about climate change? Oh, I get to try again. All right. Oh, no. That guy. All right. Physicist is an expert in physics, but not a climate. So a fake expert. I get it. Dun, dun, dun. Very good. All right. 15 cranky points. Not bad. You just learned how to spot fake experts. You'll be seeing them everywhere. Oh, I have. Now let's put your new cranky skills into practice with a quiz. All right. Let me say it again. I never repeat myself. Is this one of those, what do they call them, paradoxes? Let me say it again. I never repeat myself. It's going to be false, I guess. That's right. If you repeat that, what's that called?
Well, I guess I needed to have a bunch of true, like either inherently true or inherently false statements at the start of the game, before you'd learnt fake experts and all the other fallacies. Because like now you can start doing questions with fake experts in it, but before you couldn't.
Gotcha.
So I needed statements that were either tautologies, so they were inherently true. You know, I am what I am. It's a meaningless statement, but it's inherently true. Or contradictory statements. So two things that couldn't both be true at the same time. So, you know, repeating yourself that you never repeat yourself is contradictory.
All right. That's right. If you repeat that, you never repeat yourself, then obviously you're repeating yourself.
I would do one more quiz, take another quiz.
Okay.
And that should level you up.
Okay. The summit is at the top of the mountain. That is true. Unless this is a trick question. The summit is at the top of the mountain.
That's where people start to kind of overthink it.
Okay. All right. Level 2.
There you go.
Nice.
You've leveled up and your mood has just got slightly crankier from agreeable to displeased.
Oh, good. Glad. All right. Of course, the summit is at the top of the mountain.
That's what it.
All right.
But as you get further and further into the game, his face gets crankier and crankier.
Okay.
It's slightly redder and redder. It's almost imperceptible, but once you're getting into higher levels, you can. His face gets quite unpleasant.
Gotcha.
Cranky even.
Pretty cool. It's very creative. All right, so now what do? I go to learn more denial techniques?
Yeah, it's basically two elements to the game. There's learning the techniques. Yeah. Like if you scroll down, you have those 5 techniques at the top, but then there's subcategories. So these are all different types of logical fallacies, but they're all locked. You need to finish the first 5 before you can unlock the subcategories. 2 types of cherry picking, 7 traits of conspiratorial thinking. So, and this is important because
where is this right here?
This is one case where I think it is better to try to get it out to inoculate people before they start going down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole. Because once people start believing conspiracy theories, they become distrustful of scientific evidence and institutional knowledge, or just mainstream institutions. So teaching people how to spot those red flags, those telltale traits of conspiracy theories, can try to prevent people from going down the rabbit hole in the first place.
That's interesting that you have that in here. You know, when I was investigating all this stuff and writing my blog, you know, conspiracy theories weren't really on the map. And I think, I mean, do you concur with that? Is that something relatively recent where we've just got this flood of conspiracies now? I mean, I guess there was always a conspiracy that scientists were, you know, crazy liberals trying to make a buck. I mean, that always existed. But now you've got all these crazier conspiracies coming into play. I mean,
so yes and no. I mean, conspiracy theories have been with us, you know, for throughout history. And a good example would be we like to laugh about how QAnon have these theories about Democrats drinking babies' blood. You know, it's like that's crazy,
good.
Right? Where would that come from?
I like it.
That's actually a really old anti-Semitic conspiracy theory from centuries ago.
Yeah.
From medieval times. So they've just taken these old anti-Semitic tropes and rehashed them into this new QAnon conspiracy theory. So we've always had conspiracy theories, and they've always been an integral part of science denial. So climate misinformation has always had conspiracy theories, but conspiracy theories have become much more mainstream and prominent just in the last 2 years because of the pandemic. When you have an issue that threatens all society and there's all this anxiety, and particularly when it's something that's caused by random things, you know, just like a virus mutates and the bat gets eaten by some animal, which then gets eaten at a wet market. It's just all these random sequence of events. People don't like randomness. We prefer to have meaning. We prefer to have intent. we just see intent everywhere. That's why we see meaning in cloud patterns, and why when things happen close to each other, we tend to think that one caused the other.
Mm.
And we also tend to attribute intent to people's actions, like, or particularly evil intent. In conspiracy theories, one of the traits there is nefarious intent, believing that people must have evil motives for doing things. And when people are anxious, when we're in a state of uncertainty, like we are during a pandemic, people are more vulnerable to those kinds of thinking.
Interesting. Well, I could go on for a long time about all that. Let me throw something concrete out there, though, along those lines. So this is from a day or two ago. There's this, I want to say, English professor. I think he is Jordan Peterson, who I'm sure you've heard of, Canadian. And he sent out a tweet about the new variant, Omicron. And he says, he basically said that the Omicron variant exists because the pharmaceutical companies need to prop up their stock price, and so that's why we're hearing about Omicron right now, without a shred of evidence. And of course, that's his fan base just automatically believes it, or I don't know, who knows what they're thinking. I mean, he did get a lot of pushback on the tweet, but that there's just a lot of people who, because Dr. Jordan Peterson said it, they're just going to run with that idea. Now, how much? I mean, is there any? Everyone says, "Oh, the internet's to blame." People are exposed to more misinformation, but it sounds like a reasonable thing. But is there any real science to say the internet has introduced, more conspiratorial thinking into the general public? Do we know for sure on that?
Well, it's exacerbated the problem. One thing that the internet does, just at a very basic level, is it enables individuals to potentially reach millions of people with unvetted information without gatekeepers. So, just at that very basic level, it enables misinformation to spread and spread quickly. But I think even more insidious is social media platform algorithms often amplify misinformation. Misinformation has been shown in studies to be more viral, more likely to be clicked, liked, shared than accurate information, because it's not bound by the truth. It can be as extreme or emotive or outlandish as the person making it up would like. And so social media platforms profits are based on interaction, on likes, clicks, and reshares and comments. So they have a financial interest in posts that people are more likely to interact with, and misinformation fits the bill. So I think that that makes it really problematic in terms of misinformation spreading and getting amplified by social media. It's not the only problem. Misinformation was around before social media,
Yeah.
but it's exacerbated it.
Do you know of any efforts from high-profile scientists to reach out to the executives at these social media companies to try to explain, why they shouldn't be doing what they're doing? I'm sure someone's tried. Do you know if there's been anybody's gotten anywhere, been able to talk to these people?
There's lots of those kinds of efforts, and I'm part of it. Like, I
Oh, really?
regularly meet with Facebook, and
I'm sorry, I missed. What was the last part?
I've been regularly meeting with Facebook.
Oh, no
We've
kidding.
actually been collaborating on countering climate misinformation,
Hmm.
but
Wow.
solving the problem of climate misinformation on a social media platform like Facebook requires a lot more effort than just posting some fact checks on a web page. You need a whole range of tools to be able to stop it, which includes detecting misinformation, either reducing its spread through their algorithms or even taking misinformation down entirely, And then for repeat offenders, they need to be either penalized or suspended or taken down. So those are just some of the tools that social media platforms can use to slow or stop the spread of misinformation. And they need to be really exploring all these options.
Are they at least listening?
Oh, I mean, definitely. Like they reached out to me, so I am.
No kidding, huh?
At least I have their ear. The problem is big corporations have a lot of competing forces within them. So
Right.
you might be talking to someone who's very conducive to what you're saying, and they might even be fighting for the same goals within their corporation, but there's lots of tug of wars going on. And an important dynamic is there's a lot of pressure externally being directed at these social media platforms as well, from the public, from the media, from the politicians, and from different directions. Like there are climate scientists and scientists like myself working on the problem of misinformation, advising them or externally pressuring them to do better to solve the problem of misinformation. But then you also have conservative politicians dragging Mark Zuckerberg into a congressional hearing and saying, "Why are you censoring us?
Right.
You know, you're picking on conservatives
Right.
when you take down climate misinformation." So the pressure comes from both sides,
Right.
and I think that the one thing I would advise people in general is public pressure on social media platforms matters,
Mm.
because if they perceive that the market and the public are calling for certain action, um, to not do that threatens their bottom line.
Very interesting.
Ultimately, that's what they care about.
Well, that kind of shifts it to another question I think about often. I mean, who should the targets be in this battle? I mean, are we basically done, uh, you know, duking it out with Tony Heller on Twitter and through blogs? Should it really be refocusing our efforts on, oil executives and media executives? Is that where the battle should be? I mean, who do you recommend that we pressure?
It's a Misinformation is a really complicated problem with many different facets and very interconnected. So it really requires fighting multiple fronts at the same time. Like I'm just one little bit of that kind of fight, and I've picked a very narrow slice of the pie. But even then, me just trying to solve this issue of climate misinformation, I've had to take a very interdisciplinary approach because complicated problems require different disciplines coming together to solve them. Uh, Me, with my
Cartooning?
psychology background, combining with computer scientists
Yeah.
to detect misinformation, or working with critical thinking philosophers to deconstruct misinformation, or working with app developers to write a critical thinking game. So it's all about bringing together all these different disciplines. And but even then, there's multiple audiences. Like I have a game that the general public can play, but I tend to focus on teachers who then can reach students that I would never otherwise be able to reach with this kind of content.
Mm.
So it's, but politicians are also an important audience. So are social media platforms, businesses. The work that recently happened a few weeks ago where oil executives were brought into Congress and made accountable for their misinformation, that matters. And telling the story of how fossil fuel has misinformed the public in the past is an important story for the public to understand.
Mm.
So, yeah, I wish I could give you a simple answer, but it's a multi-front battle, and we need to be fighting all of them. And
Yeah.
I guess the main thing I would say to anyone watching this is we all we're all unique. We all are uniquely good at different things. So we can all contribute in different ways. So whatever you've got, just bring that to the table.
Well, yeah, that's one of the big things I want to try to do, with this little project is, just get people thinking more about the problem. And, you by yourself, you cannot do squat, you're one person. But if enough people do a little bit, you can have a tremendous influence. And you don't have to be like, you and devote your whole life and switch over, your whole career. Just little things that you do make a big difference. So if everybody just does, even if it's just a simple tweet every day about climate change, one tweet, uh, magnify that times, hundreds of millions of people, and that has a really profound impact, But
Or for those of us who aren't involved in social media, just having a conversation with someone we know and love.
right,
Having conversations sends the social signal that people care about this. You don't even have to be an expert and know all the arguments and know all the climate science. Just communicating that social signal that you care about climate change, that can matter as well.
I think that comes back to exactly what you were talking about before. We're social animals, and there's the bandwagon effect, which is, I'm pretty sure, a scientific fact, right? If more people see that others believe something, they're going to be more likely to believe it. So,
Particularly, I mean, yes, it is like social norming is one of the most powerful psychological drivers. And when it comes to climate change, even the people who are concerned or alarmed about climate change tend to not talk about the issue with friends and family. And that sends, or the absence of a signal. And then people aren't seeing anyone else talk about it, and they assume that no one else cares about it. And then you get this spiral of silence. So yes, so we definitely want to be, if nothing else, opening our mouths and talking about climate change to our friends and family.
yeah, well, just don't do it like me, because I can get a little combative. I'm not a role model in that respect. I like to
We
push.
all have our
I like to
styles.
push
So
buttons. All right, so let's get back to the app. So we talked about conspiracy theories. So we've got to unlock these different levels. So the first set of levels are what are basically all these quizzes. Let's take a look. Most logical
so
fallacies.
the way the game works
Yep.
is there's a series of explanations of each fallacy,
Okay.
which is quite short. Like you saw with fake experts, it's just a handful of screens and a couple of quizzes.
Yep.
And then once you finish that, you've completed that fallacy explanation, and then you can do quizzes. That's really the game:
Mm-hmm.
fallacy explanations and quizzes.
Gotcha. Here's an example. I have blue eyes, so I know quantum physics. That's ridiculous. Conclusion: I know quantum physics doesn't follow from the premise I have blue eyes. I would agree with that. Which argument commits the fallacy of jumping to conclusions? You can't trust scientists who support vaccination because they're all in the pay of big pharma. I don't think that's the fallacy. My dog likes milk and cats like milk, so my dog must be a cat. Well, now obviously that would be ridiculous. Thousands of educators say that smoking cigarettes soothes the throat. All right, I'm going to go with 2. All right. All right, so then we go through. So these basically teach you, and then I'm sorry. So then once I unlock, what happens down here with logical fallacies?
Once you've done the first 5
Yep.
denial techniques, and those are summarized with the acronym FLIC: fake expert, logical fallacies, impossible expectations, cherry picking, and conspiracy theories.
Uh-huh.
Once you've learned FLIC, then you unlock everything underneath. Then you can go ahead and learn all the subcategories of logical fallacies and
Gotcha.
different types of cherry picking.
I'm confused here. Why wouldn't cherry picking be a logical fallacy?
Well, you touch on a sore point there. Like
Yeah,
technically everything there is a logical fallacy.
Gotcha.
And back when the 5 techniques of science denial, FLIC, actually was proposed way back, I think in 2009 by Mark Hoofnagel. And I liked it. I started using it, but then I started asking the exact same question you just asked.
Huh.
And I tried to find a better framework, and I haven't. There's just no better way to kind of make fallacies accessible to people. So while I do acknowledge in some of my writing that technically these are all fallacies, but the 4 that I have here are the big ones that jump out.
Gotcha.
And they tend to have subcategories as well. But,
Yeah, I learned
but
all.
good nitpick.
learned. I mean, I learned these. I took some courses, college courses, after I got out of the Navy. I took a logic course, and we learned a lot of this stuff. But you know, after years, you don't think about it anymore. So this is great to get reintroduced to all this stuff.
The main, I think, advantage of it is the quizzes. Like what this game does is it motivates you to, you want to level up, you want to build points. And the way to do that ultimately is just keep playing quizzes.
Mm-hmm.
And every quiz is practicing critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm using all the elements of gameplay, like collecting points and leveling up and humor and seeing what's his next mood going to be, how is his face going to change, to motivate people to keep practicing critical thinking.
Gotcha.
Because the more you practice it, the more deeply embedded and reinforced that knowledge comes, and you get better at spotting misinformation.
Mm. And when you say critical thinking, what does that mean scientifically? I mean, I have a vague idea. I mean, it means using logic and, connecting the dots, I guess. But, I don't know. What's a more concrete definition of critical thinking?
Yeah, I mean, critical thinking is a very broad umbrella again. And so I'm using the term a little loosely,
Yeah.
Just for shorthand. Critical thinking in general means just critically making wise decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Going through a rigorous process to make decisions in life or decisions about assessing information.
Mm-hmm.
But when I'm talking about critical thinking in the context of Cranky Uncle, it's a really narrow subset, which is assessing arguments and identifying fallacies in arguments.
Mm-hmm.
Identifying fallacies isn't the be all and end all of critical thinking. There's a lot more to it. And we're hoping that future versions of the game will go deeper into teaching people how to assess evidence and everything. Life isn't binary. It's not either true or false. There can be degrees of reliability, and we're hoping that down the track the game can get more nuanced. So maybe after you've done the fallacy stuff, which is like entry level critical thinking, I'm hoping we can then get people to get more subtle with their thinking and nuanced about assessing the reliability of statements and thinking of the world in more shades of grey.
I gotta imagine educators are huge on this right now. I mean, do you see an uptick in these kinds of I don't know if you would call it a course, but just teaching logic and critical thinking? I mean, it's something that's been around, but I gotta imagine that there's more interest than ever with all the conspiracy stuff going around. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I pretty early on, even before the game came out, while I was developing it, I realized that the classroom was where this game would have its biggest impact.
Yeah.
Because I was talking to climate scientists, because they were climate scientists more than that they were educators, just explaining this game and how I was using it to inoculate people against climate misinformation. But climate scientists usually also teach classes at college. And they were like, wow, I'd love to use that in my class. And what really struck me was that these were scientists in every part of the country. Like I was in the US at the time. They were in blue states like Washington and Virginia, but also in red states like Texas and Utah. And I realized that the classroom, well, educators are crying out for interactive resources to teach critical thinking to their students. And an interactive game like this was a really powerful way to get critical thinking into classes all around the country. Gotcha. And pierce those echo chambers that I otherwise wouldn't be able to get into.
Well, it's interesting that this is much more than about debunking climate change myths like skeptical science. It really is much more about thinking rationally and critically about information, where you get it from, how it's received, and being able to analyze why that information is probably incorrect. So that's very excellent.
That's one of the benefits of the logic-based approach to debunking myths, is if you debunk a specific technique of misinformation, then people can spot that across all topics.
Gotcha. Right.
So it's kind of like a universal vaccine against misinformation.
Yeah.
Whereas
Interesting.
the fact-based approach only inoculates people against that specific myth in that specific topic.
So can you tell us about any of the, I mean, has this app been instilled or not instilled, but rolled out in any curriculums at all? Is it part of any curriculums?
Well, it's being used in a lot of classrooms, but we're still in the process of not in a formalized curriculum, like how you say. But what we've done is we at crankyuncle.com we
Let's pull
put
that
up
up.
a teacher's guide to Cranky Uncle, and we've already seen hundreds of teachers start using the game in their classrooms. So if you click on educators at the top,
Okay.
what you find is the teacher's guide to Cranky Uncle, and
where's that? Oh,
it's the big red box down the bottom.
oh, gotcha. Yeah. And so,
but hang on, before you go there, scroll down one more.
okay.
See that map?
Yeah.
There's like 37 US states. If you click on that link, what you see is,
Oh, there we go.
I think it's the last line of, that's the form where teachers can sign up to get a group code. But the last sentence of that paragraph, so far teachers have signed up from 37. That's actually 39. I need to update that. But if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see a map of the US and all the teachers who have signed up. So just if you scroll down just a little bit,
all right,
you see the full map. So we currently had about several hundred teachers sign up in the US, and I think 17 or so other countries. Unfortunately, the game's only available in English right now. We are this close from launching version 2 of the game, which is a multi-language version of the game, and the game's already been translated into German and Dutch.
Wow.
So
who's doing all this work, John? Are you still doing all this yourself, or you got a team of people?
Well, not the translations. I don't speak German or Dutch. Testing it is really hard because I'm reading it, and it's only when I've memorized parts of the game so well that I can kind of guess what Cranky Uncle is saying. But yeah, we've had a lot of help with volunteers. Nice. And we actually have 9 translations happening right now. 2 of them are finished. The other 7 are between 70 to 90% finished.
Now, in the app, I think it was on the info screen, it said something about George Mason University. Did they help get this off the ground, or did they help provide initial funding?
The initial funding was a crowdfunding campaign.
Wow.
So George Mason had a crowdfunding platform. And so we just put the call out, help us develop this game. It's a critical thinking game to fight misinformation. And we raised about $35,000, which was used for the app developers to create version 1 of the game. Version 2 of the game is the multilingual version, which is right now being developed. That funding was provided by Monash University, where I am now.
Gotcha. Nice. Now let me get a little techie again because I'm curious. Is it done in Swift on the iPhone and Java, or do you use one of those platforms like React to be able to install it on both types of phones, or do you have separate code bases for each type of device?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we actually tried to teach myself app development in Swift. And I thought I could do this myself, and quickly learned that it was way out of my depth. And app development is something that is quite complicated. And so what the app developers ended up doing was they used a platform that then was able to create both an Android and an iPhone version, because
it's cheaper.
If we did just one or the other, then we knew we were going to cop a lot of heat from all the people who were using the other type of phone.
Right.
I keep forgetting the name of the software that they used. I do have it in here, but I'm just looking up. We've written a paper about.
I know React is big. I do a phone app.
Quasar.
Quasar. Oh, I never heard of that. Huh.
Quasar is a system that they use to develop the game in, which is platform agnostic. So then they can output multiple versions.
Yeah, well, it's impossible to keep track of all this stuff. I
Yeah.
developed an app back in 2013 using something called Sencha Touch. I think it's called something different now, but anyway, I've had to convert all the apps that we've built over to a totally new platform. It's very difficult to put together an app. It's insanely difficult. It's not like a website where you just throw it up and for
that
a
was
couple
the misconception
$1,000.
I had. Having created websites, I thought I could just an app is just like a website on a phone that just pulls data from a database. But it was way more complicated, and I still don't properly understand often I'll have these meetings with the app developers and they're throwing this jargon and I'm like, I'm barely keeping up. And then I'll go into a machine learning meeting with researchers when we're training a machine to detect misinformation, and it's a whole other area, but I'm barely keeping up with them. So it's a challenge of interdisciplinary collaboration.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to, I'm so fascinated by that. I want to know what you're doing. I mean, you got the app and some of the higher profile stuff, but I'm very curious. I don't even know what questions to ask because I just don't know anything about what you do really. So can you give us a sense of, what some of the more arcane stuff that you're working on and as best you can?
Kind of academic research?
Yeah, I don't know much about academia at all. So you have to kind of give me like a little bit of a primer on how it all works. And your role primarily is in communications, right? So you don't deal with any of the physics stuff, or am I wrong on that?
Well, yeah, my work's all social science based. So it's
social science, yeah.
Either psychological research, doing experiments involving people. But yeah, I don't do any climate science research myself. The way that I make sense of what I'm doing, because as I was saying, there's coming at this from lots of different angles. It gets a bit bewildering. So the way I organize it in my mind is I use 4 Ds: detect, deconstruct, debunk, and deploy. And you need all 4 in order to adequately deal with misinformation. Detect is about using, well, for me, it's using machine learning to detect climate misinformation. Deconstruct is about using critical thinking to deconstruct claims and identify any fallacies in the misinformation. Then debunking is taking those fallacies and developing inoculations or messages or just ways to explain misleading techniques of misinformation. And then deploy is about how do we get this out in front of people? Do we use a game? Do we use social media? Do we use websites? Do we use educational resources? And deploying it and then measuring how effective it is in actually building public resilience.
Well, that's one thing we didn't talk about. So how effective has the app been in the research that you've done with it?
I was actually looking at some of the data this morning. We just downloaded the latest batch. And what we find is, it does increase people's ability to identify myths or identify fallacies. And it is statistically significant, which is the thing that us scientists are always looking for.
No p-hacking going on?
No, well, because it's a field experiment, I don't really have the control to be able to p-hack.
I barely know what p-hacking is. So.
I'm at the mercy of the people who are playing the game and whether they voluntarily choose to participate in the research or not.
Yeah.
And actually, for the first time this morning, I looked at performance, or at least overall performance by age, and I found it was as I kind of expected, but I didn't know exactly what it would look like. The score increased, like people are better at spotting misinformation as they get older. And what it basically looks like is, because I've actually got people 10 years or, from 5 to 10 years old playing the game at elementary school. So you have quite a low score, like 3 out of 10 elementary level.
Really?
Then middle school will be about 5 out of 10. High school is about like, I forget the exact numbers, but it kind of, it grows and grows, and then it sort of hits a plateau at about 30, and then it's just flat all the way. And I kept getting older and older, but it just stays at the same level. So,
Well, let me make sure I understand. You're talking about the age level, or are you talking about the scores from the app? I didn't quite follow.
yeah, as people get older,
Yeah.
the people are better able to spot misinformation
Yeah.
and identify fallacies. But once you hit about 30, it kind of peaks at that point.
Does it get worse as you get older?
No, that's the
No,
thing. I thought
really?
there might be a peak and then a drop off, but
Huh.
there wasn't any drop off.
And how does the age range skew? I mean, imagine mostly kids are using it, but am I wrong on that?
It is. It's like I think it peaks at like 17. That's the biggest age.
Yeah.
But there's still, it's sort of like it peaks at 17, but then there's still quite a lot of people in 20s, 30s, 40s, and so on.
I only glanced
But
at it tonight, but it looks like it's maybe geared toward ninth, 10th grade reading level. Do you know?
yeah, I think so. The next step, and I only just had this preliminary look at the data this morning, so I'm talking to you as I'm doing the analysis. I don't have the answers yet, but the next step is to see. Well, that was just looking at overall scores. Now I need to see change in score to see which age does the game improve people the most.
Gotcha.
My guess is it will be that middle high school, but probably, yeah, probably high school. But that it's an empirical question, and hopefully we have enough data to find that out.
So if I wanted to let the educators in my community know about the app, do you have any materials that I could send them, or could I do like do you have a campaign in a box or a website or something that I would send them to, uh, to let them know that the app exists and maybe they could at least consider putting it into the school, or should they reach out to you, or how does that all work?
If you go back one
Yeah,
in your browser, send them to that page. That's the page
this
for
page right
educators.
here. Okay.
So there's there's the links for actually playing the game.
Yeah.
There's the teacher's guide, and there's the sign up form for a group code.
Is it mostly social studies teachers who roll this out?
That's the other interesting thing. I originally, in my naivety, thought it was just going to be environmental science and climate science classes. It's been every conceivable subject has signed up, like
Interesting.
math, physics, chemistry, history, English, philosophy, psychology, media studies, like just it's any subject that has misinformation in it has signed up, and that's really every subject.
Very interesting. So even math. So how does it play into
Yeah,
math?
I would be intrigued to see what that would look like, how they would do that in a math class. I should really follow up with that teacher or those teachers. I'm not sure how many from math classes have signed up, but
And how do teachers, I mean, do you find teachers coming to you, or what generally, how does this work? Or do you have to actively promote the app to get it out there to make them aware of it?
I've been probably negligent in how much time or energy I've spent promoting it, and pretty much none, other than I'll just tweet stuff whenever there's new content, I'll tweet it. But it's kind of been, I feel like we're almost still in soft launch mode. Like we put it up, I tweeted it in January this year, so it's still, I can't believe it's been a long year, but in January we launched the teacher's guide. And again, I just threw it up on my website and then tweeted it, and that was it. And then teachers find it. Like really what I should be doing is reaching out to teacher networks like the National Center for Science Education or the Alliance for Climate Educators, and forming partnerships to more proactively get this out in front of teachers, or develop more formalized curriculum around it. That I just haven't had time because we've been so busy actually making the game and developing it.
Well, this doesn't look half-assed to me. I mean, look at all, you got a whole website. I mean, this had to take ages to put together. So it looks like you're doing pretty good to me. Well, very,
Putting the
very
website
cool.
together is fine. It's actually getting it out to people. That's the real challenge.
Yeah. And are you overall pretty happy with the success you've had with it, or feel like you're being a slug and you want to do a lot more? Or?
Well, I mean, there's always, you could always do more, but a man's, to quote Dirty Harry, a man's got to know his limitations, right?
Right.
So I think, was it Dirty Harry that said that? But yeah, I think that overall, it's probably exceeded my expectations in that seeing it, all these teachers from all around the country and other countries as well, signing up for it has been really encouraging. And we've got lots of future steps where we want to go with the game, and I'm just sort of struggling to keep up with it. So I don't think I could really fit much more in the day
Yeah.
than what I'm currently doing.
Yeah. What do you do with your full-time job, and what are you primarily working on right now?
That 4D framework, it's
Yeah.
really just kicking a lot of research in all those areas. So
What do you mean kicking
the
research?
machine learning is really exciting. And it has a lot of spin-offs using machine learning to understand different aspects of misinformation.
So what is that doing? Is it scraping the web for misinformation about climate science?
Exactly. So we're scraping blogs, conservative think tank websites, mainstream media, news websites, and Facebook for climate misinformation. But then we're also trying to integrate that machine learning work with the critical thinking work. So you mentioned, how do you identify fallacies in like solutions misinformation? We're in the process of trying to do that right now.
Wow.
It's not easy, but
No,
it needs to be done.
I can't even fathom how
and then
that
also
stuff is
doing
done.
debunking research and other attempts to deploy all this work.
And so, what is your role? So you've got the tech guys, the machine learning guys. They know how to process it. So you're like guiding them on what to look for. Essentially, you're advising them. Is that right?
Well, it's a very much a collaboration of equals. And well, I don't even say equals. It's a collaboration of different skill sets. Like they are the machine learning experts. I'm the climate misinformation expert, and we just are just trying to figure out how to further improve our machine learning model and just make it better at spotting specific claims, and also thinking about what are other different data sets that we can look at. Like, we took the low-hanging fruit of blogs and think tank websites, but there's other much higher fruit, like congressional testimonies. We've been in the process for the last couple of months, taking these thousands of congressional hearings, taking their transcripts, which are a god-awful mess, and technically just trying to take all that jumble and put it into an organized state so that our machine learning model can make sense of it all.
Very interesting. So is this AI scary good, or is it just very frustrating and you have to work for ages to milk anything good out of it? I mean, are you seeing like a miraculous type of tech, or what's your feeling on how useful it is?
It was scary hard to get it working in the first place, in the sense that misinformation is messy. I said field experiments are hard. Content analysis of real world misinformation is even worse, because it's often innuendo, there's kind of dog whistles, and we found quite early that you need to know what they're talking about in order to be able to content analyze it reliably. When we got other people because the way you train a machine is, at least in our case, was you take an example of misinformation and you map it to a specific denial claim. And then you just repeat that tens of thousands of times.
Right.
Once you've done it enough, the machine is sufficiently trained. But to be able to read a paragraph of text and understand it sufficiently that you can reliably map it and do that consistently with other people who are doing the same task requires a degree of both understanding of climate change and also familiarity with climate misinformation. You could probably do it because your experience, like with Tony Heller's blog, but we found when we worked with first-year communication students at George Mason University, their reliability was really low. It was practically unusable data.
Huh.
And it was only when we went to the skeptical science team with their climate literacy and their experience with misinformation that we were able to reliably train the machine.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's amazing stuff. I couldn't even begin to understand the math that would go into all of that. It's my I got some Java machine once that could parse an article into proper names, and it didn't do it very well. But that was kind of fun just to play around with that stuff. So I have a basic sense, but it obviously wasn't AI. Well, I guess maybe it was. I mean, it probably has data built from
More
AI.
of a natural language
Language
processing
processor.
thing.
Yeah.
Which is what we're doing now. I mentioned the congressional hearings and their transcripts. We're using natural language processing to take all these different transcripts over decades, often using different formats, and trying to extract the names and the statements and mapping each statement to a particular individual. But
Gotcha.
Imagine that the format changes over time and there's no consistency. It's requiring a very sophisticated level of natural language processing.
Yeah, no, I can imagine, but I can't imagine, if you know what I mean. That's amazing.
I know I couldn't do it, but we have a really smart guy doing it.
Well, that's the thing with this stuff. I mean, the collaboration, that's got to be a great part of the job because you're just working with really super talented, smart people, and they're all working together on a common problem. I mean, that alone's got to be a real thrill, I can imagine. I've always wanted to be a part of something like that, But yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations on that. That's good stuff. All right. What else do we want to talk about? Anything in particular?
Just one comment. I'm enjoying your background, and it's reminding me of the Get Back film about the Beatles that Peter Jackson just produced. I don't know if you've seen it, but throughout this whole film where the Beatles are playing their music, they're in this weird space where there's this kind of colors behind them which look a lot like your background.
Well, I saw a clip from that the other day, and I'm like, is that really 1969? Because the lighting on that screen is amazing. I have no idea how they did it. It looks kind of surreal.
So Peter Jackson recently put together a documentary from World War II footage, and he developed all these restoration techniques, and he just took all that technology and applied it to the Beatles footage.
Yeah. Well, they do really cool stuff now that they can take films from the 1900s, or shot at 12 frames per second or whatever, and using, machine learning, they fill in the frames and you get a really high def video from out of that. It's nuts. It's kind of scary though too. I mean, you can fake anything these days. And that, I mean, have you put any thought into what might be coming with that? I mean, if you can just generate an AI website with misinformation and just pump out tons of garbage out there. I mean, have you seen anything like that where there's just a kind of tidal wave of BS that they're putting out?
I know there's a lot of concern about like these deep fake videos.
Yep.
I'm not super concerned about those because I think that I'm not convinced that they have the potential to do a lot of societal damage. What I am concerned about, though, is a much less sophisticated form of technology, which is Twitter bots or just bots on social media.
Are those as bad now as they were a few years ago? I sense that they've declined a bit.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't have any. I don't know exactly how good the social media platforms are at detecting and pulling them down. I don't have at my fingertips any numbers on that. But like I was at a misinformation conference in Singapore back pre-pandemic. God, so that was nearly 2 years. That would have been over 2 years ago now. But there was a guy there talking about his research into Twitter bots, and he was explaining how through his analysis he showed that even within amongst Twitter bots there are structures. So you have the content generating Twitter bots, and then you have the amplifying Twitter bots who take that content and then amplify it even further. So it's quite sophisticated. I know there are a lot of research studies into detecting them and trying to nullify them. How practical that research has been applied, I'm not sure.
Well, I always like to quote Marshall McLuhan. He said, World War III will be a guerrilla war with no distinction between the civilian and the military population. And, he said this in 1967 or whatever. And that's exactly what we have. We are engaged in a massive information war that will decide, literally decide the fate of humanity with climate change. And it's almost impossible to wrap your head around how we got here.
I'm not familiar with that quote. Was he talking about literal warfare or
No? Well, he said he didn't say it wasn't a war with weapons. He was saying it's a guerrilla war, a guerrilla information war, I think is the exact quote.
Oh, okay. Well, then he was really describing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, with no distinction between civilian and military population. And, that's exactly what happened with Russia and their bots. I mean, he hit the nail on the head with that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know, John. I don't know where this all goes. It is just totally nuts to even think about. And then on top of all that, we got to go through a pandemic. It's a crazy time. But all right.
Yeah, once the pandemic is over, then I think we can focus on the much more existential problem of climate change.
Let's hope this thing ends. Yeah, it's crazy. I'm tired of just worrying about all this stuff constantly. It's just it gets to you after a while. Yeah, but I think I'm through the worst of it. As long as the Democrats can hold on to power in the United States, I'll be fine. Now, if Republicans come to power, I may completely lose it. I don't know how I'm going to deal with that.
I think things are looking too good. I wish I could give you better news on that front.
Oh my God, it's scary. Can't tell you. Well, I apologize on behalf of the United States. Very sorry for what we're doing. We're really screwing things up badly. So maybe I'll move to Australia. Do you know anybody that can get me? Get out of here.
Yeah, I barely got back myself.
Oh, really? No kidding, huh?
The borders are very difficult to get past at the moment, even for Australian citizens.
Oh, you came back during the pandemic?
Yeah, I came back here in March.
Oh, wow.
And it was not easy. It was a lot of Australians are stranded overseas trying to get back. And
no kidding.
It's just difficult.
That had to have been nerve-wracking, huh?
Very much so. Yeah, we were so relieved to set foot on Australian soil again. So almost like the Pope kissing the ground,
I know you escaped our hell. You escaped the hell of the United States.
Well, I mean, when we were living in the US in 2020 and 2021.
What part did you live in?
I mean, we lived in Virginia. We were at George Mason University.
Oh, right.
And I mean, we just stayed in our apartment the entire pandemic. So we weren't in any danger because we didn't let ourselves be in any danger. The most dangerous point was the actual trip home.
Oh no, I was talking about the hell of our politics. That's the hell you escaped from.
Well, yeah, that's.
You got some wacky guys over there too. Who was the guy Hitler was palling around with? Malcolm Turnbull. Anyway,
Malcolm Turnbull was a quite moderate conservative politician.
There was a wacky senator in Australia. I don't know if he's still senator, but he invited Tony Heller to Australia, and Heller did a little press conference with him. Do you remember his name?
Yeah, that would be Malcolm Roberts.
Roberts.
He's actually sent letters to my university when I was at University of Queensland, complaining about my research.
Jesus Christ! So you got the Michael Mann treatment, basically.
Yeah, but nothing anywhere near the level of what Michael Mann experienced.
Yeah,
and Malcolm Roberts is a very extreme right politician, and Very conspiratorial. So I don't think many people take him very seriously.
And he's still senator, though. I haven't heard much from him recently, so I don't know if he's toned it down at all or just not as
He's still a
effective.
senator. I don't think he'll be toning it down. But the last I heard of him was kind of pushing right wing talking points about COVID and vaccination.
Hmm. Yeah, that seems to be they're at least distracted with that stuff. Maybe they'll come back to the climate change stuff once the COVID passes. I don't know. All right, Dr. Cook, thank you very, very much. Loved talking with you, and maybe we'll have to do another episode later on down the road when you get the new app coming out and you want to promote that. Be happy to have you on. And I mean, I've just got tons of questions. I'm really fascinated by all the work that you're doing. I mean, I've been wrapped up in it for like 8 years now. Just thinking about this stuff, not constantly, but pretty involved, especially when I first got started. So thanks for all your work. I've learned a lot from it, and appreciate your time coming on.
My pleasure. Yeah, it was great talking to you, and good luck with your work. Just having these conversations is really important.
Yeah, no, I think so. And it's, you don't think it is because you can never tell, but it does have little knock-on effects. And if one person sees this video and they find out what you're doing with the AI work or whatever, and that says, oh, I want to find out more about that. And, so it's little things that can spark people into new directions. One little single idea that gets you excited, and then you go off and run with it, just like you did, with your father-in-law. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you just pursue an idea, and particularly online, just see where it goes. Once you involve other people, it can go in lots of exciting directions.
Well, that's exactly right. You got to put yourself out there and see what happens. Don't have any expectations, but nothing's going to happen if you just, wait to get everything perfect or just right. You just got to do something, and then connections will happen, and you'll have fun with it. All right. Thanks again. We'll see you hopefully in better times.
Yep. Thanks. And yeah, hopefully we'll talk again sometime.
All right. Cool. Very good. All right. Thanks, John. We'll see you. Bye.
Bye.